To this point, you have seen demonstrations on doing an online installation of your SUSE Manager 4 server, and then how to do the initial and administrative configuration procedures. Your next task, prior to registering any new server clients with your SUMA server, is to sync product content down from the SUSE Customer Center to your SUMA 4 server. The point of this activity is to select the SCC channels whose content you want to synchronize down to your SUMA server. This decision about what to sync down is based on the products you want to manage and patch with your SUMA server. Typically, you'll select the pool and update channels for the versions of the operating systems running on the servers you want to manage via SUMA. This will involve selecting a parent channel and one or more child channels. You'll also want to sync down the SCC content necessary to update SUSE Manager and SUSE Manager Proxy as well. You will select the SUSE provided channels to sync down to your SUMA server using the setup wizard of the SUMA web UI. To start my demonstration, I'll bring up my browser on my administrative workstation here. And there's the URL right there that was provided during the last screen displayed during the initial configuration stage. So I've already logged in through the web UI at least once, because here's my user ID and my credentials that are saved by the browser. I'll go ahead and sign in. And I need to invoke the setup wizard. To do that, I'm going to scroll down here in the navigation pane on the left. I'm going to expand admin, and under admin you'll see that setup wizard is the first one there, and that's what comes up by default. And you'll note that there are three distinct tabs on this page: HTTP proxy, organization, credentials, and SUSE products. And if I scroll down a little bit so you can see it clearly, there's also a next button down here. Now you can navigate through these three different areas of configuration in the setup wizard by either clicking next or directly clicking the appropriate tab that you're interested in. Now this, even though this is called the setup wizard, you can run this setup wizard anytime you need to. For instance, if you need to change the SCC credentials that your SUMA server uses to access SCC content, or maybe you want to add additional products that you want to sync down to your SUSE server. So if that's the case, you'd come back into the setup wizard once again. Now this opening tab, the HTTP proxy tab, you would use this tab if your SUMA server needs to access the internet using an HTTP proxy server. However, my demo setup doesn't need any configuration on this tab to access the outside world. So this really, of the three potential tabs, this really is the only optional one you may be dealing with on your SUMA server. So let me click the Organization Credentials tab. And you'll see I don't have any credentials from the SCC showing up in the web UI yet. So what I need to do is to click Add a New Credential. By default, the very first time you bring this up, what will be entered in here is the credentials for the web UI itself that you used to authenticate when you brought up the web UI. Now that's not going to be the same as your SCC credentials. So let me go ahead and put in my SCC credentials here. And the usernames usually begin with UC followed by 5 or 6 digits. Having entered in my UCC credentials, I'll now click Save on this dialog. And what just occurred is the SUMA server went out to the SCC and verified the credentials I put in as being valid. Now, if you needed to add other sets of credentials, because we do have many customers that have multiple sets of credentials, you can add a new credential set right here if you need to. So this green check signifies that my credentials are valid. This yellow star icon here indicates that these credentials right here are being used as the primary credentials for my SUME server. The icon just to the right of that yellow star will list all the valid product subscriptions that are associated with this particular set of SCC credentials. So if I click that, you get a list here of all the products that are associated with that set of credentials. Now, I've got a very large set of products associated with my credentials because they're internal credentials used for SUSE employees. So that's why you see so many products here. So let me close that. And then if I needed to edit these credentials, so for instance, I changed the password for this credential set up in the SCC, I would need to also change them here through the web UI. So the next time that the SUME server tried to sync data down from the SCC, it would pass up that username and the changed password. Now that I've got my credentials entered, I can either click the next button down here or go right to the SUSE Products tab. Now notice what's happening as soon as I hit that tab. The SUME server is refreshing the product information from the SCC that's associated with those credentials that I have entered as my primary credentials. Channel families, products, and you see it's looking up repository information and then subscriptions. I've got a little note down here. Please be patient. This might take several minutes. All right, that took about 2 minutes to complete this process that you see here. And let's take a look at the products and the channels that are associated with those products. Now you'll notice that there are multiple screens here for the products that are associated with this credential set. Here's the second page of products. And one more. And this is the final set of products associated with those primary credentials. So I need to select the parent and child channels that contain the SCC content that I want to sync down to this SUME server. And the decision will be driven by what products do I want to be able to patch and update using my SUME server. So for the purposes of demonstrations for this on-demand class, I'm only going to bring down the bare minimum that I need. So I'm going to go back to the previous page. I think it's on page 2, because what I want to sync down is the stuff to support the SLES-12 SP4 operating system. We still have a lot of that out in the field. All right, there's SLES-12 SP3, SLES-12 SP4. Okay, so let me expand that so you can see that there are child channels associated with this parent channel. Now, if I go back up to the parent channel for SLES-12 SP4, I click that. Notice what happened here. It says add one product on this button up here. Well, I still have some other things that I want to check that are SLES-12 SP4 related. Now, some of these would require their own product key as well. So, for instance, if you were doing live patching on SLES-12 SP4 servers, your credential set would have to have a valid key for this particular capability of the operating system. Let's see, I'll go ahead and sync down the workstation extensions for SLES-12 SP4. That way, if I wanted to, I could have a desktop-looking environment on my SLES-12 SP4 server with the kinds of associated applications in that GUI environment. And I'll also sync down the web and scripting modules. Now, in some channels, what you'll see is on a child channel, you'll actually see the word recommended. Those that are labeled as recommended for a parent channel, for a given parent channel, you should sync those down when you sync down and select the parent channel, the associated parent channel. All right, so I've got that. Notice that my products to add went up to 3. Let me go to SLES 15 SP1, which I believe is on the final page. Let me click Next. And here we are. So let me expand this. And here's an example of that. Notice it says recommended. So when I click the parent channel, because it's recommended, we automatically check any recommended child channels. Now notice that can be expanded as well, that child channel. And when we expanded the base system module child channel, notice there are some recommended child channels there as well. Then the other thing that I want to make sure that I sync down is the code to patch and update my SUMA 4 server itself and any SUMA 4 proxy servers that I'm going to install. So here you see SUSE Manager Proxy 4.0 and SUSE Manager Server 4.0. So I'll go ahead and select the proxy, open that up so you can see there's a recommended child channel. That can be expanded as well. Here's a child channel that is recommended and therefore checked. I'll leave that at its default setting. And then for SUSE Manager itself, I'll check that, open it up, and once again you see a recommended child channel, which actually is the base module for 15 SP1, which you actually saw as child channels for other parent selections. Expand that so you can see what's in there. And we've got a couple child channels that are recommended there. Okay, so I've got a total here of 19 checks that constitute various products or product extensions. So I'll go ahead and click Add Products. And what's happening is the SUSE Manager is scheduling the sync process for all of those selected channels and child channels. So I'm going to let this run for a while. This will probably take, given the amount of content I'm downloading and my link speed, this will probably take about 3 hours or so. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run, and then when it finishes its sync process, I'll show you how you can tell what happened during the synchronization of these various parent and child channels. Now that I've specified the channels, both the parent and child channels for the products that I want to sync down to my SUMA server, I've let that run, and it took about an hour and a half or so to get all that content that I specified a little bit earlier in the demonstration down to this particular server. So the next question I want to answer for you is, how do we know what was successful in terms of the synchronization process? Well, there are multiple ways you can find this information out. So let's start first with the easiest to get to, which is the notification messages. You'll see this little bell icon up here on the top menu bar. You can click that, or if you go to Home and then select Notification Messages, you'll end up in the same place. So either one of those. Now what you see here is for each synchronization attempt for a channel, what you will see is whether or not that synchronization activity for that particular channel that's listed, was it successful or did it err out? So all you'll see in this log, in the notification messages regarding synchronization, is either it was successful or it erred out. Now if it erred out, this particular message notification here doesn't tell you why. It doesn't show you any kind of error message. I'll show you where you can get that information a little bit later here. Let me show you one of the channels that I specified to sync down. And what I'm looking for is the SLE module based system related channels. SP1 pool for x8664. Okay, so let's look at this one. So here you see channel sync finished. To get a little bit further detail here about what was going on, if I click that link, what you'll see is there were 378 packages that were actually brought down during that synchronization process for that particular channel. Now to see what packages that were actually brought down, you can get a list of them by clicking on that button with the number of packages on it. So here you can search if you need to by package name. Now once you've got some client systems registered with your SUSE server, you'll actually be able to see information here about systems that have subscribed to these channels and their patch status. So let me go back to details here for that channel, and we'll see this information show up again in a different format, different way. So this particular channel had 3,078 packages that were brought down during that synchronization process. Now let me show you an example of an error. So I'll go ahead and click that bell icon this time, and I believe it's probably on the second page. So I'm looking for the channel here, SLE 15SP1 desktop NVIDIA drivers. Now all we see here is that the channel sync failed. And if you go into the details of this channel, all that you see is that 0 packages were brought down. But here there's no indication of what the problem might be regarding the synchronization of this channel. When it comes to notification messages, these are not in real time. They will only display pertinent information to you either after they have completed the sync process, or if there was an error, you will notice in the notification message that there was an error, but nothing about what type of error it might have been. Now, another way to get information about channel synchronization results is if I go under software here, channel list, and so far the only channels I've got here on this system are SUSE channels, the SCC content. Let me expand this particular channel here, SLE product SLES 15 SP1 pool, and notice parent channel and all these child channels, and here's that same information we saw in the notification messages for this base system 15 SP1 pool channel with 3,078 packages in it. But these are all the child channels that are related to this parent channel. And this is the same information we looked at in the system messages just a second ago. Now let's look also at the information that we saw in system messages for the channel that aired out, the NVIDIA channel. So let's take a look then at, it should be under the SLED 15 SP1 pool. And here's that channel that in the system notifications showed an error. Notice there are no packages here. That in of itself doesn't necessarily indicate an error though. If I go into that, once again I saw the details screen that I was able to get at from system notification as well, but I don't see once again any type of error message. So if you're looking strictly at your channel list, that's not going to tell you that an error occurred on this channel. What you know is that no packages came down. There's also another way to see this information as a result of the synchronization process. So in the web UI here, I'm going to go to admin, setup wizard. Remember I said you could run that at any time. And I'll go to SUSE products. And if you remember, I used this screen to specify what products I wanted to originally sync down to this SUSE server. And I believe it's on page 2. And SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 15 SP1. Okay, so here we see the parent channel. Notice this particular little icon there to the right will show you mandatory channels and whether or not they were successfully synced. So we would see a failure to sync here on this particular dialog if there was an error. And then you see some optional channels which I haven't synced down. But also notice we've got a percentage bar over here, and if I wanted to, I could force another synchronization to happen by clicking that particular double arrowed icon button right here. that would put a synchronization event on the SUME manager's queue for this particular channel. Now if I expand this, it's got child channels. You'll see also that the base system module 15SP1 synced to 100%. And here are those mandatory channels. You can see that they are synced. Here's optional channels that I did not sync. And I'll expand that out further, and you'll see that all these did finish at 100%. Let me show you then the NVIDIA channel that we know aired out by looking in the setup wizard here. And that, I believe, is on page 3, and that is under the desktop 15SP1, I believe. Okay, so this is the one I want. Let me expand it out completely, and you'll notice that this particular child channel here, the sync failed on it. Now I could schedule another sync directly for that failed child channel by clicking this button, but before I do that, it really does make sense to go to the authoritative source when it comes to channel synchronization issue. And that authoritative source for these kinds of issues is the log file that the SUME manager server maintains for each channel and child channel that it syncs. There will be, in a particular location, I'll show you in just a second here, in the file system of my SUME server, a log file for each one of these parent channels and child channels that were synced, whether it was successful or not. So it's those log files that will give us important information about why a synchronization event failed. So what I'm going to do here is minimize this and get into a console prompt where I can SSH into my SUME server. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. SSH into my SUME server as the root user. Put in the password. Let me show you where these log files are kept. So on the SUME server, under var log rhn repo sync are where the log files are kept. And the log file names are the names of the channel themselves. So for each channel that you sync, be it a parent or child channel, there will be a log in this subdirectory on your SUME server by that name. Now, what's different in the way these names are displayed between the web UI and the directory listing where the log files are, as you can see, is that all the log file names are actually all in lowercase. Alright, so let's take a look at some information here. Let me show you an example of one of the channels where there was actually just nothing to do. The synchronization process completed successfully, but it didn't bring anything down. So let me show you the log file for this. And the log file will show you the exact command that the SUME server issued to do the synchronization. And the log file will actually show you the URL where that content is stored. In other words, the URL of the repository in the SCC where that information will be downloaded from to your SUME server. Now in this case, notice there were no packages in the repo, and it shows the sync as being completed. So a lot of times what I will do when I'm checking out these log files is I'll first look for the log file size and number of bytes in the listing. And generally, if the size of the log is less than about 1,000 bytes or so, either that indicates, generally speaking, that there's either no packages to bring down and sync, or there was an error of some kind. So let me show you that NVIDIA log file that we were looking at in terms of the web UI before that showed that there was some kind of error. Now, just to make sure I get the name right, let me find out what that exact name was. It was something to do with NVIDIA. So let me do a listing here to. All right, and it was for SLES 15SP1. Okay, so got the log file name there. Let's type out the contents of this. Aha! So here's the command that was executed. Start of the channel sync process, but then you see the error, cannot access repository. Maybe repository GPG keys are not imported. One thing I like to check when I see an error is run this command, but leave off the non-interactive switch. Because this command, spacewalk-repo-sync, if it's in non-interactive mode, if there's any handshaking that occurs that requires the user to interact with the script in any way, well, the user can't. It's in non-interactive mode, and you'll generate an error. So what I like to do in a case like that is simply run this command, but without the -- non-interactive switch on the command line, so I can see potentially more information about why the error occurred. So let me go ahead and do that. And let me check my spelling here real quick on the channel name. That's where I tend to mistype these things the most. All right, so let me go ahead and run this command now without the non-interactive switch. So you see the start of the channel sync started, and I get prompted about whether or not I want to trust a key. That's why it errored out. So I want to go ahead and always trust this. And now you see packages in repo 9 and 9 packages to download. So really the only place you can get the information, the detailed level of information you need to troubleshoot channel synchronization is in that channel's log file. And so there you see the sync process has completed. The next time the SUME server goes to sync this channel, because I have said I always want to accept the keys, the GUI, the web UI, will reflect that, and the channel synchronization process will complete successfully, because now the GPG keys are known to my SUME server. Now let's take a look at the large channel synchronization we looked at before that had 3,078 packages in it. Let's look at its log. So the base set of modules for SLES 15SP1. And here you can see once again the command that the SUME server used to start off the sync process. You see its actual URL where the repository is located for this content, packages in repo, and you'll see linking packages to the channel. So simply bringing down the RPMs is not the only processing that takes place during a channel synchronization. This information has to be stored in the Postgres database along with the metadata, and that information has to link then between the file and its metadata. So just bringing down the files is not enough. We actually have to do some database linkage work. But here's an example of a fairly large channel where the sync was successful. So at this point, you know how to select the content that you need for the types of operating system clients you're going to support with SUME Manager, how to initiate that first synchronization from the SCC, and then also check the progress of all the synchronization activities for all of your repositories.